By the time this evening is over, you will understand why Steve's favorite saying is, whatever you do in life, do it with passion. It gives me great pleasure, with passion, to introduce Steve Binder. Steve, before we talk about you-know-who, tell us a little bit about your period before show business, in the era known in the Binder house as BE, which stands for Before Elvis. Okay? So let's take a short walk down memory lane and tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how the heck did you get into this business that you've been in for so long?
I've very fortunately had two great parents who kind of devoted their lives to my sister and myself. They'd never had the advantages that we had. My dad ended up, out of necessity, of having a gas station. In those days, you really serviced your customer. You checked their tires, their oil, you washed and wiped their windshields. And my entire junior high school and part of my high school was going down to downtown Los Angeles to my dad's gas station and working there. While I was going to college, I went to USC and I signed in for pre-med. Basically, not because, as it turned out, I couldn't stand the sight of blood or dissecting rabbits or frogs, but I wanted to repay my parents, truthfully. And so I thought becoming a doctor, a lawyer, Indian chief, I mean, would be a good way to repay them. And when I grew up in an area in Los Angeles near Olympic Boulevard and La Cienega, if you're familiar with it, and I lived my youth in La Cienega Park, playing football, baseball, basketball, any sport they had. I was there every day participating. And I eventually went to USC and registered in 2 years of undergraduate and then registered in pre-med. And don't ask me why, other than what I just explained to you. Never had show business on my mind, ever. The closest thing that I came to it on our block in Carthay Circle was an actress named Jean Tierney, and she was married to some kind of a prince at the time. And as a 5 or 6 year old, I used to go to her house every day and ask for an autographed picture of her, which I had no concept of what even it was. And many times she answered the door herself and got used to me showing up. I'd take the picture, go home, throw it in the waste paper basket, and wait for the next day. And what happened was in 1954, I was at USC and I was in the Air Cadet program. I thought I wanted to be a pilot. And I had to sign a contract for 2 years, and they would supply you with books and uniforms and what have you. And all of a sudden, when the Korean War started, they came to us and said, we want to change all your contracts from 2 years to 4 years. And my dad said, you're not going to do it, Steve, because there's a huge difference between serving for a couple of years or doubling that into 4 years. And I would encourage you not to sign the new contract, which I followed his advice, and literally within weeks later, I was drafted into the Army and reported to Fort Ord, California for my basic training, immediately put in the medical corps, sent to Fort Sam Houston, where they had a huge medical facility and hospital, and had to go through 8 weeks of advanced basic training. And I didn't want to do it. I heard that there was a program in the Army for the military, for the American Forces Network. And so I went to Highland, and I think it was Santa Monica Boulevard, where they had a Hollywood branch. And I auditioned as a radio announcer for I had a 2-week or a 2-day pass, a weekend pass, coming down from Seattle. And I auditioned at that time and happened to meet an officer who told me that he was the commander in Salzburg, Austria of the Blue Danube Network. Hey kid, give me your name, rank, and serial number and I'll see what I could do. Completely forgot about that meeting. Went back to Seattle to finish my training. And lo and behold, I got orders to go to Salzburg, Austria and join the American Forces Network as a radio announcer. And who did I meet right away was George Clooney's dad, Nick, who was the star announcer for the network in Frankfurt, Germany. And the Americans, at that time, Austria was occupied by 4 countries. And the MPs, the military police, used to ride around in jeeps from these, representing all 4 of these countries, which was England, France, America, and Russia. And I never forgot that every time we went to Vienna or to any of these exotic Austrian countries, I started out stationed in Salzburg, Austria. The Russian soldiers would be escorted into museums and fine art environments. Americans would head for the bars. And to make a long story short, we left all the 4 countries, pulled out of Austria, gave the country back to the Austrians, and I was reassigned to the American Forces Network in Germany. And I became a radio announcer both in Munich and Nuremberg, and had a great time. I was a disc jockey. I did Luncheon and München, and the Munich Night Train, and all these shows where I could pick my own music and just basically have fun. And until a general didn't like the sports announcer that he was listening to in Munich, and they basically took away my disc jockey shows and assigned me to play-by-play football with these military units. And so I came home and I decided I've got to go back and finish my education. I think I'd finished about 3 1/4 years at USC. And I happened to come back from the military at a time when there was like 3 more months of school for the students who were there, and then summer vacation, and then I could re-enroll, etc. I had talked to a high school friend of mine, and he didn't go to college like many of us did. He instead went to work as an assistant editor on Star Trek at Paramount. And he said, Steve, I have some advice. You're going to get bored sitting around doing nothing for 3 or 4 months. I suggest you get a job at a network or a studio, and you could meet a lot of pretty girls walking around there. And that's what I did. I got a job in the mailroom at KABC, and I had to lie my way into the job, promising I didn't want to do anything else in life but to work for this guy delivering mail on the lot. Didn't meet any pretty girls at the time, but I was fortunate I did meet the program director at KABC, a gentleman named Seligman. He was the brother-in-law of the president at the time, Leonard Goldenson, at ABC Network. And I delivered mail to him, and he evidently was doing nothing, had some spare time, and he said, "Sit down and talk to me." And we had this incredible conversation where he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be sitting in your seat interviewing you." And he got a kick out of that. And next thing I know, he actually gave me a job as a director. I knew nothing about television. First time I went to a control room, there was a director named Norman Abbott. And Norman was a nephew of the great comedy team of Abbott and Costello. And he was leaving to go to CBS to direct the Jack Benny Show and the Bob Crosby Show. And I was given the job to direct at KABC his old assignments, which was a cooking show with Chef Milani, Al Jarvis and his wife doing a dance contest show of swing waltz and cha-cha. And luckily, I was assigned to a show called Soupy Sales. And I became the director of Soupy Sales at 4 in the afternoon and had the time of my life. And the show was so successful because it was programmed basically with dirty jokes, with leaving out the punchlines, but the kids all knew the punchlines anyway, so they would rush home from school to watch Soupy. And we became so popular that the ABC network decided to put the show on Monday nights in prime time. And I was given that assignment too. My first guest star was Frank Sinatra, the second one was Mickey Rooney, and I think the third one, let me think who that was. I can see his face, but I can't remember his name, so we'll pass that one. And then the network program director came back to town. He was evidently on a business trip to the East Coast while all this was happening, and he insisted that a network director direct the network hour on Monday nights. And as a result, he took me off the network show and told me I can still do the 5-day-a-week local show. And I did the normal reaction that any director would do. I quit. And I said, if I can't do both shows, I'm going back to school anyway, so this was a fun adventure for a few weeks, and I'm leaving. I no sooner got home when my stage manager on Soupy Sales called me and said, "Listen, I've been doing the Steve Allen show, and Steve just got fired because he was doing, which was quite an entertaining intellectual part of his show, was Meeting of the Minds, where he would put 4 historical figures together at a round table, and with actual text from their past history, they would have a discussion at the table from different centuries, generations, etc. And NBC previously had fired Steve because his contract said it was going to be a 1-hour comedy show, and he was breaking the rules of his contract, so they fired him. ABC picked him up, and they ended up with the exact same thing. They fired Steve because he was doing the Meeting of the Minds. And as a result, Steve decided that he wanted to produce and forget entertaining as a on-camera entertainer. And I was asked, I had never met Steve Allen, and I was asked if I wanted to do, Steve was going to finance 26 half hours at CBS with the old Playhouse 90 crew, and do a jazz series hosted by Oscar Brown Jr. featuring 26 of America's greatest jazz stars, from Stan Kenton, Nancy Wilson, Cannonball Adderley, Shorty Rogers, etc. And I used to, with no rehearsal, show up at CBS on a Saturday and shoot 3 shows at a time, and we did 26 half hours, which you can still see on YouTube. And in the middle of it all, I get a call at home from Steve Allen. And he congratulates me for the success of his jazz series now, which was picked up by Desilu, which was now syndicated all over the world. And he said, I just signed a deal with Westinghouse, and I'm going to start hosting a 90-minute a night, 5-night-a-week show that'll be syndicated, and I want you to direct it. And I said, I can't, I'm already doing your jazz show. And he said, well, you'll do both, and I'll replace you on my show once we get it off the ground. And so I began directing Steve's show, and there was in the LA Times, there was an editor named Cecil Smith who handled entertainment. And he wrote a whole column about me with my picture saying who has the best job in television, et cetera. And then he described Jazz Scene, and he described the new Steve Allen show. And I ended up off that show getting all kinds of offers from people to do other shows. And what happened was with the Westinghouse show is that Johnny Carson was doing a daytime show for ABC, and NBC picked him off and was going to do the Tonight Show with him, but ABC wouldn't let him out of his contract. So we had a whole year in advance of Johnny and the Tonight Show starting on NBC, and it was insane. We had people writing in for tickets a year in advance, et cetera, and Steve, in his inimitable way, used the audience on his show as a tool. We went out on Vine Street. We did all kinds of crazy stunts where we had him jump into a swimming pool filled with Jell-O. We had a elephant tug of war. This is a crazy story, but we hired this old elephant from, I think, Sparks, Nevada, one of their casinos. And we had our crew open the show by pulling on one side of the rope, and the elephant was on the other side. And we had barriers on, and the street was called La Mirada in Hollywood, right below Sunset Boulevard before you got to Santa Monica. And I asked the trainer if the barriers weren't there and the elephant won the tug of war, what would happen? He said, oh, he's old, and he would run half a block maybe at the most, and then he'd be tired out and he'd stop. And so I told my crew, even the guys in the control booth went out on the street to help pull on our side against the elephant, and I told our crew to take away the barriers. And so they did, and now we're live. We're actually live on tape doing that show. And at the moment that we're pulling and pulling on the rope, and the elephant is, all he had to do was just give us one tug, and the whole crew would be flying onto the street, which is exactly what happened, and the elephant takes off. At the exact same time, a little Volkswagen is coming around the corner, heading face to face with this charging elephant. I never, I could hear the gears grinding in the Volkswagen, but I never got to talk to the people. And can you imagine them telling this story, saying they went to Hollywood, it probably as tourists, they turn a corner and there's a charging elephant coming down, heading directly towards them. But we had a lot of fun on the show. I met, in 2 years that I did it, I met everybody in show business practically, behind the scenes and in front of the camera. We had Lenny Bruce, we had Woody Allen, we had everybody on that show. And when I left the show, I got my first network primetime rock and roll show. I guess I was chosen because I'd worked with a lot of music acts at the time, and the T.A.M.I. show. And And I went to New York to do Hullabaloo. I fulfilled my contract, but I got an offer to direct Danny Kaye at CBS. And I loved Danny Kaye. As a little kid, I always went with my parents to his movies with Dinah Shore and what have you. And I thought he was brilliant, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity. When I got to LA and started doing the show, it was the second season. And I didn't realize the first season they loaded up with great writers. He won the Peabody Award, et cetera. But the second season, when I was coming in, they let the original producer and director go, and they brought in a new team. And that team, and especially the writers, hated Danny Kaye. And when I went to the writers' room, they were throwing food on the walls, et cetera. And I came in all gung-ho saying, we're gonna bring Danny Kaye, and you're all gonna have a great time. And I gave him a big pep talk, and they were complaining he didn't want to try any new characters, and he sort of poo-pooed their ideas and so forth. And so I built the staff up to where they were really enthusiastic. Danny went on vacation. We were assigned to write the first 2 shows and pitch it to him as soon as he got back. The pitch meeting was Danny. He always had one of those sailor gob hats pulled over his head. He had a pipe which he didn't light, and he just sucked on it. And he had tennis shoes on, and he put his legs on the conference table, and he sat back and said, okay, pitch it. Well, we had a new producer who had no experience in comedy or being a producer. I think he was a game show producer that Danny had met in New York or something, and he hired him to produce this season, and I'm the director. And normally in a reading of comedy writers, you let the writers themselves pitch their material because they know it backwards and forwards, and they're usually very funny guys and gals to begin with. Although there weren't very many women in primetime television at the time, even hired. I only knew 2 women who were associate directors, and they were on the Lawrence Welk show at ABC. But it was such a male-dominated industry at that time. It basically still is. But anyway, to make a long story short, is the producer decides to read both shows, 2 hours of comedy material, and he bombs from the first minute he starts pitching. When it's finally painfully over, and every writer is laughing at his own material as this producer is trying to interpret it and doing a miserable job. And Danny sucks on his pipe, it's not lit, says, congratulations, boys, you've just given me the worst, I won't use the expletive, piece of you-know-what that I've ever received in my entire career, and he fires the producer on the spot. And they bring in the old director to be the new producer, who I'm not supposed to work for. Well, Danny and I were, unfortunately, oil and water. I don't know, whatever reason, maybe I was too young or whatever, but he hated me from get-go. And, he had a little girl on the show at the time called Victoria Meyerlink, who he'd do these really charming one-on-one, and as soon as the light went off of the camera, meaning he'd finished the bit, he would announce to everybody in a loud voice, get this little expletive off the stage. We had animals on the show. He hated animals, and animals hated him. And then I got a call. I had worked with Sammy Davis a couple of times on Hullabaloo, and Sammy was just signed a deal to do a series at NBC, and basically called me and said, I just sold a new series, and I want you to produce and direct it. And I said, I can't. I'm still under contract to Danny Kaye, and I've got 2 more shows to do. He said, well, go to Danny and get out of your contract. And I said, okay. And I went to Danny's manager, and I said, you know, we're not getting along anyway. The one thing he hated is I, for the first time, I guess, took the singers on the Danny Kaye show out of the studio, and we shot all their production numbers in Griffith Park. And Danny hated it. He did not want to leave the studio. There's a specific incident with Shirley Jones. I had Paul Weston, our musical director, I had him put music to two poems that I remembered as a kid. What is a girl and what is a boy? A girl is sugar and spice, everything nice. A boy is spiders and what have you. And I had Shirley sing the girl's part, and I had Danny come out to sing the boy's part. We shot Shirley, who was pregnant at the time, I guess, you know, with one of her sons. And she was an incredible trooper. Her manager kept coming up to me saying, she's pregnant, don't work her so hard. And Shirley would interrupt and say, no, I'm loving this, I want to do it. And so from morning to lunchtime, it was all Shirley Jones learning this and taping this one segment. Danny arrives after lunch for the second half, and I could tell he was irritated the minute he walked out of his car with his manager. And what do I do? You know, let's get this over with, and so forth. So I walked through the bit with him, and there's a lot of pantomime in it, and he's supposed to be pantomiming a tiger, a lion, a giraffe, whatever. And he's got it all confused, so he's having the giraffe be the lion and the elephant be a monkey, whatever. And I got in the habit of, even when I was rehearsing, of taping everything that I did. Tape was cheap, you just have to roll the machine. And luckily I taped this segment, and you know, I told Danny all the mistakes that he made that we were going to correct when we actually tape it. And I walk into the control room, get the staff ready to film, and one of my cameramen says, look at my viewfinder, Steve. I don't think you're going to be too happy. And I look at the viewfinder, and there's Danny walking out to his car and driving off. Yeah. So we aired that segment as is, since I had it on tape, even though it was all screwed up. Not one negative letter from the public. Nobody saw anything other than they enjoyed the production number, which is another good lesson that I learned.
Steve, sorry, I want to interrupt you because I'd love to know, you didn't get on with Danny like oil and water. What about Elvis Presley? Did you get along with him the moment you saw him?
Well, first of all, I want you all to understand my relationship with Elvis Presley lasted for all of maybe 4 months, period, from the day I started with him, which was in May of 1968, until the last day that we saw each other. And after that, I never saw him again, talked to him again, etc. He did send messages. My musical director, Billy Goldenberg, did Change of Habit with Mary Tyler Moore with Elvis. And Elvis used to, through Billy, send me messages, seeing if I was okay, etc.
We'd like
to answer your question.
Well, yeah, we're going to get back to what's his name in a minute.
Okay.
But I'd love, because you can give us the insight into what we're about to see, and why I liked it and why I thought it was a great piece of film, because we see Elvis in your show. We see him relaxed, we see him dazzling, we see him, the many faces of Elvis, we see him, the magnetic Elvis, the comic sense of humor Elvis, can you believe? Elvis the Adonis in a black leather suit. So before further ado, can you, Jamie, hit the Elvis segment, please? Well, how did you get Elvis, Steve? How did you get him to relax? Because did you hit it off right away with him? Were you on the same wavelength?
I'm going to tell you the inside story behind the scenes. I was producing and directing Petula Clark and Harry Belafonte when Petula reached over and touched him, and it was the first time in variety television history that a black and a white person touched each other, and it basically broke the color line. It was a big story all over the world. Newsweek magazine, Time magazine picked up on it, etc. And at the same time, Colonel Parker realized that none of the movie studios wanted to put up any more money for Elvis movies. And so he got the idea that the people who had the big bucks were the television networks. So he went to NBC and he got a meeting with the head of NBC at the time, Tom Sarnoff. And he asked Tom if they'd be interested in financing Elvis's next movie project, which turned out to be Mary Tyler Moore's Change of Habit. And Tom wisely said, yes, we will finance the movie, but only on one condition, that you deliver a 1-hour television special with Elvis, and then we'll put up the money for the movie. Well, at the time, Elvis hated television. He didn't want to do it anymore. And he'd been made fun of by Steve Allen, who had him sing Hound Dog on his primetime show dressed in a tuxedo with a real hound dog in front of him. He had Milton Berle hitting him with powder puffs on his comedy show. And primetime was dominated by comedians or middle-of-the-road singers like Andy Williams and Perry Como, etc. What happened was the Colonel knew this and didn't tell Elvis the deal he made with NBC. So when it came time to reveal the actual contract that he made, Bob Finkel, who was a 50s iconic producer-director who had a business deal with NBC, was told he could produce and direct the show. But every time he approached Elvis, Elvis would call him Mr. Finkel and not pay any attention. And Bob read about my Petula Clark Belafonte special, felt that he needed to find somebody around Elvis's age, somebody who was in the music business, and at the time I had partnered with a top record producer named Bones Howe, and we were exclusively producing all the hit records in our company for the Fifth Dimension, the Association. Bones was in the studio with Laura Nyro, and he felt, there was no way he could get Elvis. We had the contract, but we couldn't get Elvis to do the show. So he called me and asked if I was interested. He had just heard about or seen the Petula Belafonte show. And he said, I know you're in the music business as well, and you'd be the perfect fit for Elvis. I turned it down, and I said, Elvis is from Tupelo, Mississippi. He lives in Tennessee. I mean, he may be a redneck, and I'm a liberal guy from California. I'm into the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean and R-Ax and so forth. And as fate stepped in, Walter Wanger, this iconic 50s producer, dies of a heart attack, and the movie's called off. Bones, my partner, said, Steve, I think you and Elvis would hit it off great. I engineered one of his soundtracks for one of his movies, and I just have the feeling, knowing you and knowing Elvis, that you'd be a perfect combination. Why don't you call NBC back and tell them you're available, which I did. And I was told by Bob Finkel if they could get Colonel Parker to agree, but he won't let you meet Elvis Presley until, he approves you personally. So what happened was that I said to Colonel Parker, or I said to Bob Finkel, I have one condition. and that is without Colonel Parker or an entourage or anything. I want to meet Elvis one-on-one. I want to meet him alone and find out for myself if we can work together and if we're compatible. So I went out to MGM with Bones to meet Colonel Parker, and I was told by Bob, oh, by the way, when you go out there, bring some Danish pastries. And I said, okay, and my office was right near a French pastry shop. So we stop, and I pick up a half a dozen, and I say, great, we're going to have coffee and Danish for breakfast when we meet this guy. We go out to MGM Studios where the Colonel had his office, and he greets me. I hand him the paper bag with the Danish in it. He goes over to his briefcase, opens it up, puts the bag in his briefcase. To this day, I have no idea whatever he did with our Danish pastries. And the next thing he did, he said, he gave me a gift. He already had prepared a Snowman's Club membership. There was no membership fee to get into the club, but it was like $10,000 to get out of it. And he gave me a booklet with all the rules and regulation of being a snowman, a membership card with my name typed in as the recipient. And he then gave me a 1/4-inch audio tape, which was his and Elvis's gift to disc jockeys all over America, of 20 Christmas songs, and Elvis, no dialogue from him whatsoever. Well, I instantly knew I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't interested in that kind of a show. So I leave his office, we drive back to my office. On Sunset, I get in, and Finkel's on the line, and he said, I don't know what you did, but you charmed Parker, and he's approved. Elvis will be at your office tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was. The next day, Elvis comes into my office. I don't know if you remember in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard near the Whiskey A Go-Go, there were 2 glass elevator buildings where when you stepped in the elevator, you could look out onto Sunset Boulevard, et cetera. And that's where our company was. And in the rest of the building, there were no entertainment people. It was all doctors and lawyers and psychologists and what have you. And Elvis comes in, and one of Finkel's biggest complaints, he would never call him Bob. He always called him Mr. Finkel. He walks into my office, and he's got a few of his entourage with him. And he said, he sees me, and he waves at me and says, hey, Steve. And I was already ahead of the game. And I said, come on, Elvis, let's go back into my office. I want to talk to you for a while. And as he's walking, we had a slew of Bones's gold records on the wall for the Fifth Dimension and the Association and what have you. And I think Elvis felt pretty comfortable. And the first thing he said to me is, what do you think of my career? And I blurted out without even thinking, I think it's in the toilet. And he laughed, and he said, finally somebody's speaking the truth to me. He said, I think we might be getting along. And then he said, I hate television, Steve. It's not my turf. And I said, what's your turf? He said, making records. And I said, okay, why don't you make an album and I'll put pictures to it? And he told me much later on, those are the words that really convinced him that he wanted to work with me. Priscilla told me a few years later that when Elvis came home from that first meeting with me, he said, I don't care what the Colonel says, I'm going with this guy Binder. I just got a gut feeling about him. And he lived up to it. That was, we didn't join Elvis or any of the Elvis Presley estate personnel or his entourage, so to speak, his Memphis Mafia. We had already created a whole team of people that I had worked with previously, like Billy Goldenberg was the assistant to the musical director on Hullabaloo, Peter Matz. Gene McAvoy had worked with me and on Hullabaloo doing the sets. And Earl Brown, who wrote If I Can Dream, who was my choral director, I had worked with on another show previously. So we were family, and I decided I wanted to do specials that if the star fell out, unlike most specials, because, you know, for whatever reason, we in America love to label things. For instance, breaking news. I mean, how many things really break when you watch the cable companies and the networks? It was the same way in those days in specials. What was so special about 99% of the specials that they presented?
Steve, was it a Christmas special? Did you end up making a Christmas special?
Elvis never wanted to do a Christmas special. As a matter of fact, when we finished the show, there was one incident where the Colonel was so upset because he was losing every battle. I was wondering why the Colonel didn't fire me. I mean, I didn't know what Elvis had told Priscilla, and you know, obviously the Colonel would have fired me in 2 seconds, but he didn't have the power to, because Elvis stood up to him. And when Elvis joined my family of, you know, the creative team, when we went into our think tank, we had no inhibitions, no restrictions, no way. We just created the show we thought, we all felt would make Elvis rediscover himself. That was the key to our concept in the show. He had totally lost faith with himself. He had thought it was because of Colonel Parker and his genius, RCA Records and their promotion department, and you know, he had been away from the public by that time, 2 years in the Army, about 8 years making movies. So he said to me, I'm not sure the kids today are even going to accept me anymore. I'm 30 years old, you know, and the British invasion had happened with the Rolling Stones coming to America, the Beatles, you know, all these English acts that were really making their mark in America. And, you know, he said, I'm really not sure that any of them will accept me anymore. What if the special bombs? And I said, you'll still be known for your early Ed Sullivan appearances, your movies, you know, your fans, etc. But that'll be the end of your career as far as any future is concerned. But if it's a hit, Elvis, every door will open up again and you can do anything you want. At the end of our relationship, and we had a fabulous buddy relationship, you know, as a matter of fact, I was concerned all the way through because I kept saying to Elvis, especially after we pitched the show we wanted to do, do you want to, you know, not do anything we did? Do you want to change anything? Do you want to offer any suggestions? I mean, you know, it's your show. And he said, no, I love everything you're pitching me, and I'll do it all. The only thing he asked for was he wanted a musical director on the show to replace my staff guy. He wanted Billy Strange. And Billy was in the studio with Nancy Sinatra doing These Boots Are Made for Walking. And his record company was screaming at him to get an album out, because now that we've got the hit, we can sell tons of Nancy Sinatra albums. I hired Billy Strange because Elvis asked me to, and every day I kept saying, you know, I need lead sheets of the material that we're creating for Elvis. And he said, don't worry, Steve, I'll have it ready for Elvis by the time you start rehearsing. And we did all our pre-production at my offices on Sunset Boulevard. And I didn't take him out to NBC until he knew all the material he was supposed to do on the show. Sans the improvisation segment, which turned out to be the guts of the show, the heart of the show.
Steve, didn't you set Elvis up on the studio with his own quarters, and wasn't that one of the catalysts to Elvis Unleashed? Do you remember that period? When he brought in a piano and started jamming and he felt comfortable? Well,
the thing that really was great is Elvis came to me early on and he said, I rented a home for Lisa Marie, who was 2 months old at the time, and Priscilla, to live in Beverly Hills. to go in those days from Burbank at NBC to Beverly Hills would be a minimum of, let's say 50 minutes or an hour. And he said, that's 2 hours of traveling time every day. I would prefer, if you don't mind, throwing a bed into my dressing room, and I'll live out here while you do the rehearsals and the show, and tape the show. And that's exactly what we did. He didn't want Priscilla even to be at NBC. She only came out once when we did the pre-planned orchestrations of his early hit records of Hound Dog and Blue Suede Shoes and all those early hits. Anyway, what happened is we'd finished taping and Elvis would have the rest of the evening open with nothing to do, basically. I think we had a hamburger drive-in stand, Bob's Big Boy, across the street from NBC, and that was the extent of entertainment for him, unless he traveled. And so I started seeing him in his dressing room just start fooling around and jamming. And whoever happened to be in the halls or within earshot of him singing would go into his dressing room and they'd add on. And I'm thinking, wow, this is better than all the actors and the singers and the dancers that I hired. Incidentally, the whole budget for the Elvis Presley special is mind-boggling. I heard I brought the show in for $450,000. Wow. I mean, today it would have been $3 million minimum, The producer would make $2 million or whatever. Yeah. But what happened is that when I told the Colonel that I was going to bring cameras into the dressing room and tape it, he said over my dead body, you can't bring a tape recorder into the dressing room, nothing. And every day I was hounding him and bugging him, and he kept saying, no, you can't do it, I'm not going to let you do it. You're doing a Christmas show, Bindle. And Bindle was his favorite expression when he was trying to get to me. And so what happened is that when I told Elvis about it, and then the Colonel came to me, I guess I'd bugged him so much, and he said, okay, I'll tell you what I'll let you do. You can recreate what he does in the dressing room out on stage, but I won't let or promise you that it'll be in the show that we actually deliver to NBC. In those days, he was still hoping I would do a Christmas show. In fact, all the way through the production, he was hoping I'd do a Christmas. At the end, he was hoping I'd do one Christmas song.
Did you? Was there one Christmas song at all, or was there anything?
Nothing. No, I had done nothing. Elvis had actually, the Colonel brought us into his little room off the stage and told me that Elvis wanted to do a Christmas song, and I was the reason and I said, that's not true. Elvis can, if he wants to do a Christmas song, it's not too late, I'll put one in. As we left his office, Elvis jammed me in the ribs and said, using the F-bomb word, F the Colonel, we're not going to do any Christmas songs. I said, good, and we went back out and we didn't do any Christmas songs.
Steve, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about what Tom Hanks described in his movie, Elvis, as the diabolical genius. In your mind, was Colonel Tom Parker a diabolical genius? Was he a con man, a cartoon villain? What's your take?
He was a circus performer, and he pulled wool over everybody's eyes. I was shocked when I saw all these, grown men, executives kowtowing to him, bending, over to please him. And, to me, I had the greatest executive producer any producer director could have on any show. Bob Finkel spent all of his time keeping him away and entertained away from Elvis and myself. I never dealt with the Colonel all through the production, one-on-one on stage. They played liar's poker every day. Bob lost a fortune on purpose just so it would please the Colonel. one day Bob receives a case of Dom Perignon champagne, and he's all excited that the Colonel gave him this and so forth. He's having a dinner party that week, and he decides he's going to serve the champagne to his guests. Turns out that the Colonel had filled every bottle with Gatorade. And they were doing things like that all the time. You know, they exchanged pictures where the Colonel went out and took a picture of himself in a Southern Civil War costume and presented it to Bob. And Bob went out and had himself photographed as a 1812 American naval officer and presented it to the Colonel and things like that. But what worked great for us is that we were, you know, unencumbered with anything coming from the Colonel or any new suggestions or anything. The only thing he just kept pounding away on, we're going to close the show with I Believe. Well, I Believe, I remember Frankie Lane in the 50s or something had a hit record, but I didn't know how it related to Christmas to begin with. And, you know, and the Colonel, at the very end, when I finished the show, I delivered the show, I was called to the executive tower at NBC in Burbank, and all the executives were sitting around, and there was Colonel Parker leaning on his cane. He prided himself as an amateur hypnotist, and he was a carny. I mean, he was a total phony. And he was leaning on his cane, staring at me with his steel blue eyes, you know, probably thinking in his mind that he was hypnotizing me. I don't know. And so the head of NBC at the time, the program director, Herb Schlosser, said, "We have a big problem, Steve, that only you can solve." And he said, "The Colonel's not letting us air the show you edited unless we have a Christmas song in it." And I said, "We didn't shoot a Christmas song." And then out of, you know, the air, I remember during one of the improv sessions, Elvis, I remember, sang Blue Christmas and another song, while Charlie Hodge, one of his entourage, who participated in the acoustic side, was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Sing it dirty, Elvis, sing it dirty." And so I can honestly say I love doing the Elvis special. He was great to work with. We were United Nations on wheels. We had a black choreographer, a Puerto Rican choreographer. The dance companies came from all different walks of life and religions and so forth. And Elvis treated everybody equally. Everybody on my staff got to really spend solo time with him and all came back with a positive feeling. So much happened during that period of time of 3 or 4 months. You know, we were all together when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated on television live at the Ambassador Hotel. We stopped rehearsing in the piano room. We went into the television room to watch what was happening. And then, you know, we spent the rest of the evening until maybe 3, 4 in the morning just talking about what's going on in our country with John Kennedy and Martin Luther King and now Bobby. And we just bonded as human beings. And I never put Elvis on a pedestal, ever. And I'm asked that all the time, you know, how did it feel meeting Elvis Presley? Well, I was not that impressed with Elvis Presley. In fact, I thought, you know, I needed to find out for myself whether he was the real goods, he was the real guy, or he was just part of the publicity machine that was going on and all the stories of not being able to shoot him from the waist down, which was a great stroke of luck for the Colonel, because the public, while watching it, said, what could Elvis possibly be doing from the waist down that we can't even see on television? And, you know, so, you know, I thought, truthfully, especially at the end of our relationship, I thought we were going to end up being personal friends. And, you know, it never happened. You know, I said to him, the last day that we met and I showed him the edited show, the first time we saw it with a few members of his entourage, and I had brought his original drummer, pardon me? DJ Fontana, and his original guitarist, Scotty Moore. And it was at Elvis's suggestion that I bring him in, and thank God I listened to him and did, because Elvis forgot he was doing television when he did those jam sessions. After initially balking at even going out on stage and doing it, because he called me down to the makeup room, he made everybody leave, and he said, "Steve, I hate to do this to you, but I don't remember anything I did in the dressing room. I don't remember any of the songs. I don't remember any of the stories." So I took an 8x10 piece of paper, which he took up on stage with him, and wrote down what I remembered from those sessions. He's the only musician, artist, superstar that I know or ever worked with or heard about their rehearsal habits and so forth and so on. He's the only one who, when he walked up on that stage to do the improv, after telling me he didn't remember anything that he did, he didn't want to go out there, he didn't want to embarrass himself and so forth, and I literally kind of forced him to do it. I said, if you just go out and say hello and goodbye, that's good enough for me, but you got to go out there. And when I went to the control room, I didn't even know if he was going to show up. He did 2 hours. I mean, he forgot he was on television, and I think DJ and Scotty were a great part of that, of making him feel so comfortable. And I didn't have a song list, which all artists have when they go into concert. You know, we didn't talk about what he was going to talk about or anything. I just said, go out and do it, and that's what he did.
Steve, I must. We have a lot of people with questions. Sorry to interrupt, but I must ask you this. Baz Luhrmann's film, you're in it. Well, you're not. You're in it, but an actor plays you.
A terrific young actor.
How was it to see yourself portrayed in this movie, which has done phenomenally at the box office? And tell us about that.
I'm still processing it. My family knows I was in it, but I went to I use the word reservedly, see it, and I didn't know they had the actor playing me who was one of the stars of Stranger Things, and I think it will be a huge, huge star in the future. It was, you know, they had him smoking all through the movie. I didn't see that when I went to see the movie at a Warner Brothers screening, and not only did I not see that, but they had me smoking throughout, and Baz knew I never smoked a cigarette in my life. I think he took a lot of literary license, and I think Baz is a great director. I mean, I was swept into that movie from the first, you know, frame hit the screen. It was just brilliantly done. And I think, considering that Tom Hanks and his wife both got COVID when they started production in Australia and Queensland, and came back and finished the movie. And I know that the fans are sort of taken aback because they really believe to this day that he was a Southern colonel. And he had no when Colonel Parker left the Netherlands, supposedly he committed a horrendous crime, and he was worried if he left the United States, he would be arrested by Interpol. That's why he never took Elvis anywhere outside the United States. And he went to, on a steamer, he went to Florida, became a dog catcher, joined the United States Army pre-World War II, and was discharged with a medical discharge. And I assume it was a mental discharge.
Steve, we will come back next week and we'll talk more about Colonel Parker, because he is a fascinating character, I agree with you. But I think we have a lot of questions. We want a little bit of time. Go ahead, please, because Steve is such a fascinating mine of information that we could go on for another hour. But there, let's have what the audience wants. Dare is handling the questioning.
So this evening we have our first question from someone who's attending via Zoom. John would like to know, who suggested the black leather clothes?
Who suggested the black leather clothes for Elvis?
Elvis, when we were in a private conversation alone, he told me what a big fan he was of Marlon Brando. And he showed me a picture of him on a Harley Davidson motorcycle trying to imitate Brando's movie when he was the gang leader of a motorcycle gang.
The Wild
Ones,
yeah.
Exactly. And he had the full regalia of the leather hat and the costume. I brought Bill Ballou in, our costume designer, and I said, Bill, I don't want anything store-bought on the show. So this is what Elvis, admires, and I want you to make a black leather outfit that is original. You design it, but I want it to be original. What I made the mistake of, I only made one costume. When Elvis did the improvs, I don't know if it's for public knowledge or whatever, when he did the first improv session, the acoustic session, he orgasmed in his black leather suit. And Bill Ballou came running on the stage with his pants, showing me what had happened, and he didn't know how he was going to get ready and get the pants ready for the second improv. So he brought his whole staff of costumers out on the stage with hair blowers. But it taught me a lesson: never just make one costume.
And also, that sounds like a wet dream to me. Daya, do you have another question?
We do.
Steve, I wanted to ask you, I saw the film, and you brought up the period of time in '68 when you're recording this and you're doing it. They have a couple scenes in there where Elvis seems to be very moved himself when King is killed. He's quoted as saying Dr. King was always right. And then he's very moved when the Kennedy assassination takes place. Do you remember what he said at that night? I mean, did Elvis show any emotion on that evening?
Yeah. I think you got, everybody heard the question. It was a bit difficult, but what did Elvis say to you at the time of the Bobby Kennedy assassination?
And his reaction.
And his reaction.
We all rushed into the television screen live, and Bobby was just shot. And Elvis participated with Alan Bly and Chris Beard, my writers. I think Gene McAvoy was in the room with us. And I had no idea. Elvis never went to college, but he was so damn street smart. And when I went to Graceland and went up to the bedroom, I think I'm one of the few people other than family that was allowed up there. There was nothing Elvis in his bedroom. It was all about political figures who were assassinated. He was incredibly well read on the subject. And we just spent the whole evening, all of us, talking about, the country's out of control. And, little did we think in this year, we're beyond where we were in 1968. And, but he was really street smart, and if he was interested in a subject, he really was pretty well read on it. And so I had a lot of respect for him. And that evening kind of turned all the staff became so close to him that were with him that night, and we talked. Elvis was really interesting. He had Billy Goldenberg, our musical director, teach him on the piano Clair de Lune, his classical piece of music. But anytime any of the Elvis world people walked by where we were, he would immediately stop because he thought it was a sign of weakness. And I think that was kind of through his, that was his mentality, not just at the time, but when anything happened that he, I know that the image of Elvis Presley, especially when he got into the movie business, was he was the perfect human being. I mean, the greatest singer that ever happened, et cetera, et cetera. He used to put himself down as a guitar player, yet every major guitar player that I've ever talked to had tremendous respect for him in the way he played guitar. But his modesty was kind of drilled into him, I'm assuming, a lot by the Colonel. And if the Colonel didn't get his way with Elvis, he would go to Elvis's father, who was in the military. No, it was Priscilla's father was in the military. But Vernon would then, because the Colonel kind of had Vernon, I understand, wrapped around his finger, he would go to Elvis and say, do what the Colonel wants you to do, and Elvis would do it. But I really had tremendous, with all my doubts and my fears of who Elvis Presley really was, he wasn't one-dimensional. He was a human being. He was totally three-dimensional. I saw some flare-ups of his temper, but those things were never revealed to the public. He was physically and mentally, the perfect Adonis male figure, and it just wasn't so.
Steve, I think we've got a lot of other questions, so I'm sorry to interrupt you. Other questions?
Yes, Steve, I want to let you know I really enjoyed your book. And you end that book by saying, I always felt that Elvis died not from drugs, but from boredom. Can you elaborate on that?
It's simple. The Colonel, when Elvis told me first person he wanted to travel around the world and meet his fans, he never wanted to sing a song that he didn't believe in anymore. You realize many of the songs in the movies were written by screenwriters who never wrote a rock and roll song in their lives. He never wanted to do a movie that he didn't work with a really good director and a really good script. And I said, Elvis, I hear you, but I'm not sure you're strong enough to do all that. And the Colonel, and this is not first person, this is hearsay, but the Colonel evidently talked Elvis into staying in Las Vegas as while he gambled away his fortune. And that some people say that the Colonel took around 70 or 80% of Elvis's salary, made a deal with RCA that Elvis would get no increase in his record royalties, and they paid the Colonel under the table if he could convince Elvis that nobody was getting more royalties than he was, which was untrue. Songwriters that I'm friends with, that I totally respect, basically refused to write songs for Elvis because the Colonel wanted to own all their publishing rights and writer rights, etc. And so it was. To me, it was a tragedy. To me, he had so much to live for. He was special when I met him. He was free of drugs. He was free of alcohol. He was in perfect shape when we started to work on this special. And to read about, I knew it was over in Las Vegas. The first year that I saw him and wasn't allowed to even see him backstage, the Colonel had already put the kibosh on me and maybe persona non grata. But the first time he was having fun, really enjoying it. When we did the '68 special, he told me he'd never sung with an orchestra in his life before. He would just sing with his rhythm section, and then he'd go home and they would bring the musicians in and overdub all of his songs. When I had 40+ musicians sitting at the recording studio when we were doing some of the tracks, he was scared to death. He said, I never heard a Billy Goldenberg arrangement. And we launched basically the Wrecking Crew, the greatest studio musicians in Los Angeles in history. They on their own became famous. And, in terms of trying new things, wanting to do new things, he wanted to. I think he because of the Svengali control that the Colonel had over him and his father, he did anything and everything that I know he didn't want to do, and it also leads me to believe, aside from his incredible talent, that you got to die young to be that legendary. You got Bob Dylan traveling the world right now, who contributed so much to society and youth and so forth. And he goes, other than the music press, he goes totally ignored because he's going to live out his life and be 80 years old plus, or by the time he passes. And when you think about who's Elvis Presley, that could be compared to him, and you think about Marilyn Monroe, who died in her, early 30s. You think about James Dean, who died probably in his late 20s. I mean, so it's a weird situation, and I just take it one day at a time. With all the stars I've worked with, I've really not bonded with any on a social level. When we do it, put my heart and soul into it, give 100%, but when it's over, it's over. The only exception probably is Diana Ross, because I've done so many projects with her over the years.
Thank you, Steve. I think we probably, there's going to be a book thing, do we have time for one more question?
I think we do have time for one more question, and we have a Zoom question. And the question is, did Elvis ever tell you a joke that you remember? Or did you ever make Elvis laugh?
Come to think of it, probably the answer is no. I don't remember him outright just telling a joke.
But Steve, he had a sense of humor. We saw
no
him.
question about that. But it wasn't originating a joke or saying, "Hey guys, listen to this." I heard a really funny one today or something. It was always his perspective and his way to look at life, and it was always humorous and always entertaining. And he had a paid entourage. This Memphis Mafia that they talk about so much. They were, in my opinion, what I observed, because I didn't hire any of them except I hired Charlie Hodge and Alan Fortas, Lance Legault, his stand-in, when we did the improv sessions, and DJ and Scotty never saw Elvis after the Colonel fired him until I made the call and asked him to come do the improvs, and they never saw him after. They never saw him for the 10 years he lived after we did the special. And they only did it for Elvis. They hated the Colonel. They didn't want to do it for him. He broke them all up. And but it was an incredible experience. And I'm glad I did it. I'm grateful I did it. I was told years ago, Steve, no matter how many projects you do, how many shows, how many stars you work with, you'll be the guy always remembered for doing the Elvis Presley comeback special, and it's true.
Thank you.
You know.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. We interrupt this program for an unpaid commercial, and the unpaid commercial is that Steve's brilliant book is available to get on the way out. And believe me, I've read it. It's brilliant. It's the pictures, the words. I mean, we've just touched the surface, but you get the book, Steve, and you really learn everything you ever wanted to know about Steve, about the Presley comeback special. So I don't know if you want to add anything. Yeah.
The best thing about the book for me is the publisher didn't try and gouge the buyer. It's a tabletop book, and it was done by a brilliant artistic designer who lived in Canada, who I was introduced to, who did the Paul Simon book. And I was amazed that they didn't charge double when they came out with the book and the version of it. But it's to me, if you're interested in more of storytelling of what really happened behind the scenes, it's not only informative, but you can afford it. And I think most people who are Elvis Presley fans, aren't the elitists in our society. They're just plain hardworking people, and they can afford this book. And I'm really happy that that's what happened with the publisher.
Thank you very much, Steve. Very much.
Thank you,
Dan?
Steve. Thank you, Steve, so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Steve, for joining us this evening. And thank you, Ivor, for masterminding this event. If you enjoyed yourself this evening and you paid admission to get in, I have a great deal for you. You can join the museum, become a member, and you can get either free or reduced admission to events just like this. We also have an ongoing commitment that the museum will remain a free admission museum. So families, grandparents with their grandchildren, everyone can come into the museum, and museum members make that possible. So we hope that you will join us. You can do that at venturamuseum.org. I want to let you know that in July we have Lego summer camps. If you've got those littles running around and you need something for them to do, we have Lego camps here and out at the Ag Museum. I also want to let you know that in September, our local history happy hour is going to return with Melina Semple Watts, the Ventura County author of the novel Tree. These events and more can be found on our website. And finally, those of you in the audience who are members, there was a raffle for a signed copy of Steve's book, and it is my pleasure to announce that Glinda Cardona, who is here this evening, has won the free copy of the book, and I'll be giving it to you in just a moment. Thank you all again for coming, and don't forget to check out the beautiful book on your way out.
Check out the book because it's a terrific read, and it's a souvenir that is going to be worth a lot more when we're all back here again in 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivor.